What do you expect in terms of candidates going after one another?
Well, I know what people want. I've been talking to people in Ohio, and they really don't want Democrats to eat each other on the stage. They just want to know more about them at this point. It's very interesting that Andrew Yang is getting a lot of excitement. He's actually higher in the polls. He's like this outlier. He's 44, you know, the guy with the cap that said math. I mean, talk about like a new face. He's kind of offering the excitement that we saw on the Sanders campaign, and he's polling higher than Klobuchar and Booker, and so he would be someone to watch because there's still time for an outlier to kind of rise up.
And Rick, what do you think it is about Andrew Yang? Maybe beside the $1,000 promise.
Free money helps.
Free money does help, yeah.
I think there is something compelling about a guy that just seems to have played by the rules and done everything right and believes in math and believes in science and just is able to say, look, how can you be more different than Donald Trump, as he says, as an Asian guy who likes math? That I think there's a clarity to that I feel like is compelling to people. And in a sense, he's gone viral in a whole range of different communities where people start hearing about him and sharing. And I think there'll be more scrutiny on him as a result.
Well, let me just kind of say, I don't want to necessarily pour water on the Yang gang, but we're talking
but you're going to try.
But I'm not going to try. I'm going to reference the fact that he's at 2-point-something% in the polls. So the difference between him and Amy Klobuchar and him and Booker, there's nobody's in the double digits except for 3 candidates. And that's why this race, some people think there's 3 candidates plus 1 or 2 more. Is Andrew Yang's doing well for himself? But he's at 2% in the polls.
But I'll tell you why it matters. It's because he's directly addressing the pain in the country. He's saying that truckers don't have jobs, that robots are taking jobs away. And I think the message that the
robot thing seemed to have resonated.
It did resonate because a lot of people don't know how to use the latest generation of an iPhone, and they're only like 60 years old. He's saying that basically, he's saying the middle class is hurting, and forget about a lot of talk about the 1% and the poor, but what about us? The average savings in a household in America is only $12,000. 1 year of college is many times more than that. And so they want someone like Yang or someone to say, help me. It's kind of a big moment for the Democrats to retake the middle class.
But the difference between him and Jay Inslee is 4 respondents in a poll.
I agree with that. I mean, right, to some degree, I do think that really what I am very curious is at the point when we eventually see some fragmentation in the party. Right now, Joe Biden benefits from an extremely fractured field. He has been extraordinarily resilient in poll after poll after poll. And when we even talk about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you know, both of them have struggled to gain support from kind of key constituencies in the Democratic Party, namely African American.
And Rick, to that point, can Warren overtake Biden if Bernie Sanders does not start fading out even more than he appears to be fading out?
I think there's a conventional wisdom that they take from the same voters. I don't know that it's necessarily the case. I think they're very similar ideologically. And I think, look, right now we're down to, as Matthew says, you could 4 or 5 candidates that put themselves in a top tier. I think the danger for either Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris is, are you going to fade off of that? Does this become a one-on-one race at one point? I think Elizabeth Warren has put a lot of things together in the last couple of weeks that would suggest that she has a really good matchup. But you look at how she positions herself as a candidate of revolutionary change. There's a lot of Bernie Sanders in that. There's a lot of not Joe Biden in that. There is a pretty clean contrast.
And let's talk about those candidates who did not make the stage. We've got Tulsi Gabbard, Tom Steyer, Montana Governor Steve Bullock. Do they have a prayer going forward? What do they do when they don't make these debate stages?
Well, we all have prayer, so we all have, that's always an option. I think if you're not on the stage in Houston, the race is basically over for you, and you have to figure out a way how to get out of this race. And there's even people on the stage in Houston that basically have no path to victory in this. I think it's fascinating to me about the complaints from Tulsi Gabbard and the complaints from Tom Steyer in this, saying that somehow the process was rigged or that wasn't transparent. These qualifications have been in place for months. And if somebody like Andrew Yang can make the qualification or Amy Klobuchar can make the qualification, then if you can't make those qualifications of getting 2% in the polls, it's time you reconsider your race.
And speaking of that, Kirsten Gillibrand dropped out this week. She was on this program a couple of weeks ago, full of optimism. She seemed to be the voice of feminism. That was her campaign. Why did she fail?
You know, it's always the X factor, right? She just didn't break through. I think that there were many women. I think what's even more interesting is why Warren is breaking through.